the US sovereign bond rout. It's on. It's full on right now. It's been on since August. To put some context around how much yields have risen in the last, month and a half or so, I'm going to read out some numbers. The low recently, the recent cyclical low was put in at 1.156. We're talking about the 10-year US Treasury yield. Today, before the show, it's 1.538, a 38 basis point rise. Most of that has happened very recently. On September 22nd, we were at 1.3%. Today, this morning, 1.538, 24 basis points of the 38 so far. Jeff, this sort of reminds me, by the way, have I introduced you? Jeff Snider, head of global research for Alhambra Partners. Jeff, this sort of reminds me and you of what we saw in mid-September 2019.
Which was, a significant rise in yields then too, though under vastly different circumstances, right? We just talked about in the previous episode, September of 2019 and really the middle of 2019 was very different. I mean, we had recession signals in the yield curve, which everybody's supposed to pay attention to, the 2s and 10s, the inverted, which got everybody talking about, hey, what's going on here? Globally synchronized growth, inflation, where did those things go? Jay Powell he'd done one rate cut already in late July 2019. Things were really different back then than they seem to be today. And yet in September of 2019, despite these darkening recessionary clouds, not just in the US, but really around the rest of the world, with many countries like Germany and Japan already kind of in recession at that point, these dark clouds gathering, it didn't seem maybe perhaps reasonable that bond yields, not just in the US, but around the world, but particularly treasuries, were rising all of a sudden after signaling this darkening downturn, recession, and all this other stuff. We start out September with a really serious and very short and sharp sell-off, which I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, Emil, was about 40 some basis points in a matter of 7 trading sessions.
43
in 7 days. I mean, makes what's going on today seem like, the kiddie table, which that was a real bond sell-off, a real bond rout. And again, September. So here we have very different, there was no taper in September, quite the opposite, or September 2019, quite the opposite. You've got the Fed doing rate cuts. The Fed had already stopped quantitative tightening. And very soon after, of course, we had the repo event, which led to repo operations, which aren't repo operations, but they mimic repo operations. And then after that, you have not QE5. So very different than what's going on today, yet yields were behaving in the same way regardless.
Dear audience, I'm going to read 2 pieces of poetry right now about the seasons, and I want you to guess which one is the bard of the bond market and which one is Alexander Pushkin. Okay. Flowers that deck the autumn fields more closely touch the heart than all the blooms that summer yields. Their petals with sweet poignance drip, so too most sweetly lip meets lip when it is time to part. Okay, that's example 1. Now let's see. Maybe September just isn't the month to be in US Treasuries. Spring is supposed to be the season for rebirth and regeneration, when the darkness of winter is cast off for the warming sunshine of seasonality, representing the always eternal, unwritten future, the chance for a do-over. Maybe for once, something will actually go right. It's beautiful.
I can't believe you. So your
It's
intention
beautiful.
was to embarrass what I wrote by comparing it to a real writer, Pushkin.
This is lovely. I personally don't like spring. I love summer. I'm more of an autumn man myself. But Jeff,
I think there are a lot of people who like autumn a lot too. And there is, we've talked about this before. There is a deep embedded seasonality that goes way back into the early days of the American Republic and the American economy that has to do with the flow of agriculture and the trade of goods. And then there's, of course, a seasonality that with regard to the Christmas shopping season every year. It's a defined seasonal pattern in economic data, money flows, everything else. So it stands to reason that there would be some kind of underlying seasonality in certain marketplaces like US Treasuries that are related to, pricing optimism. That's kind of what when we talk about growth and inflation, rising nominal yields signal rising optimism that we're going to see more growth and more inflation, hopefully more growth than inflation. which is consistent with good times, happy times, things that we want to see, an economy that's working. So rising yields, seasonality, the hope doesn't spring eternal in spring. It may be at least for the last decade or so, hope springs in autumn.
Now we know roughly when the seasons are going to arrive and depart, but they never last exactly the same amount of time, right? There's a length, just like we learned from Game of Thrones. Winter can last for many, many years. And as we've learned from the Fourth Turning, a season can last an entire generation. When looking at bond markets, same thing. This seasonality that you were just discussing, we can observe them arriving roughly around the same time with different lengths. The first one we're going to talk about is 2014. I'll pull up a graph. You inform us that's the shortest one of this set that we'll be looking at.
Yeah, 2014, we started out that year with tremendous amounts of optimism. You had the taper tantrum, which is really not a tantrum at all. It was the bond market saying, Ben Bernanke, we see what you see. Yes, we think maybe the economy is getting better. And then late in 2013, starting in September 2013, it was, oh no, maybe that's not the case. So throughout 2014, even as the labor market data in the US got better, the bond market pessimism started to creep back in slowly but surely on its way toward what we call Eurodollar number 3, which is the third dollar shortage event since the global financial crisis. In fact, the third, including the global financial crisis, which was the first one. But even then, in this more and more determined pace lower, almost a straight line lower in bond yields, which is again in rising pessimism, you get to late August and early September, and there's a temporary deviation, a very substantial one, which today would be called a bond bloodbath, which yields rose for a couple weeks there up until into October, which signaled at that time maybe a little bit, not more optimism, but a little bit less pessimism, at least for those couple of weeks in September of 2014. And then, of course, right quickly back to the collateral problems and the rest of Eurodollar number 3, which became history very soon after.
Let's go back a few more years. So over there, that little bond route we saw was 29 basis points. In 2011, it was a little bit longer. I'm going to pull up the graph so people have a visual context. Some of the same things were happening. Europe was at center stage again,
Yeah, except in 2011, the crisis part of it had already registered. So it's sort of the cart before the horse in this instance, where we have our landmine sharp drop in yields through the middle of 2017, 2011, excuse me, though still consistent with the pattern, seasonality. Summer seems to be the worst part of it. And then you get to September. No, it wasn't August, but September, we're still in the same area. The Federal Reserve does Operation Twist. The Swiss National Bank pegs the franc to the euro. The European Central Bank does a couple of its things. And next thing you know, bond yields are off to the races higher. And then you have a real bloodbath where the 10-year US Treasury yield rose by more than 70 basis points, which if that happened today, it would be so shocking that I think it would seem like it was the end of the world.
It was the end of the world. I remember it. We're moving forward one more year, and now we've got another similar pattern repeating. In 2012, this time from July to August, we saw a rise of 43 basis points in US Treasury yields. I'll pull up the graph. Let us know if you want to tell us anything about it, Jeff.
Just what's striking about the chart as you pull it up is how similar it is to 2021. It's not exactly the same, but we would never expect to see exactly the same. But there is definitely some fractal, hints of fractal behavior here going on. Though again, where our yields bottomed in August 4th of this year, in 2012 it was July 25th, which was in the same general ballpark. In somewhat, different circumstances, in fact, very different circumstances in 2012 anyway, which is what really grabs our attention. How can bond yields exhibit the same seasonal behavior when it's very, very different circumstances? In 2012, things were going toward recession again. Europe was actually falling into recession. It had been in a recession. The US would come very close to one in 2012 after the 2011 crisis. And much of the rest of the world, China, emerging markets, were starting to see signs that their globalization happy days were over. So 2012, the skies were really darkening, whereas in 2021, they're supposed to be getting much brighter. And the Fed, rather than thinking about taper cutting back, in 2012, the Federal Reserve was actually, in September of 2012, announced a third QE and then a fourth later in December. So the Federal Reserve monetary policy going in the opposite direction from what it's doing today, yet same seasonality shows up in 2012 versus 2021.
I'm going to quote you from your article, but before I do, I first have to tell people where to go to see that article, because I don't think I introduced it to people yet. You can find it at Alhambra Investments, the blog post, where Jeff posts nearly every day, except for Saturdays and Sundays. Jeff, get back on it. Come on. Maybe more autumn than strictly August. September 27th, 2021 is what you want to see when you look for this article. Here's the quote. Though these are all, or nearly all, following along the same calendar regimes, none of their bond routes have ever represented anything more than a temporary waypoint in between the way down in yields. Meaning, hey, we've seen this pattern before. We're in the middle of the rout right now, but remember what happened last time. Remember the context of a global silent depression. Don't expect this route to continue. So, leading to recovery.
What is this little burst of optimism that happens every fall? How can we explain it? That not every year, 2013 being one of the examples, and 2015 maybe less of an example too. But other than that, most of these years, as we talked about in the previous episode, especially 2017, 2018, 19, 20, and 21, it seems like the seasonality repeats even more pronounced. The seasonality is itself more pronounced. So how can we explain it? And what I said in the last episode was that there's this technical explanation, banks window dressing for their G-SIB surcharges, but that would not explain 2012 or 2011 because that didn't come about until 2016 and really didn't have an impact until 2017. So there must be something else happening too. It can't be just these G-SIB surcharges, and I don't think it is. I think that's just part of what's going on here. So there's something else going on that may be related to just pure emotion and sentiment. You know, we get more optimistic in the fall simply because maybe there's something human nature about it, but I also think there's something very much economic about it too. You think about, Emil, do you remember Stanley Fischer's quote from 2014, where he said, you know, year after year, we predict recovery, and then 2 quarters into the year, we have to apologize for why it's not happening. Well, you know, it kind of sounded like it was a throwaway line when he was apologizing in Sweden, because he wouldn't do that in America. He was in Sweden apologizing on behalf of the Fed's screw-ups. What he was really saying is kind of human nature too. We do think in calendar chunks. It's very, you know, human to do so. And so we think, you know, the economy starts out every year, and what Stanley Fischer was saying, it started out every year poorly. And remember residual seasonality too, that debate in the GDP figures, how the first quarter of every year seemed to look very different from all the other quarters, to the point where the BEA actually changed its seasonal calculations and adjustments to account for the fact that the first quarter of every year seemed to start out badly. And where we're going with this is that each and every year we end the year on promise. Things look good. Things look like, okay, maybe next year things will fall in line. But then what happens? We start out every year, the following year, in the wrong way. And then we think, okay, this is bad. It's happening again. We let it fester through the summer. And then by the fall, what ends up happening? By the fall, it becomes too hard to ignore. And usually what you see is the Federal Reserve or some central bank or something around the world attempting to correct the problem, which is what Stanley Fischer was talking about, which is why you see QEs, for example, introduced in September. 2014, as we were just talking about, there was TLTROs in the ECB when? Early September of 2014. In 2017, a little bit different. The Fed, in order to instill more confidence in its globally synchronized growth forecast, decided it was going to say, we're going to cut back on our balance sheet, quantitative tightening. When did that happen? September of 2017. 2012, we just talked about what 2012, everything was going in the wrong directions. July 26th, Mario Draghi makes his infamous promise. And then in September 2012, as the year which was supposed to be recovery started out badly and only got badly through the fall, by September, the Federal Reserve says we need to push some optimism into the system. QE3, September of 2012. 2011, as we just talked about before, bond yields bottom in September. Again, same pattern. First quarter of 2011 was a negative number. It was so bad, it was an even negative number. Nothing got better. You know, everybody always says, oh, forget the first quarter, second quarter will be better. It didn't get much better. And then you get to the third quarter and the summer doesn't seem to be getting any better. And by September, what does the Fed say? Operation Twist. We got to instill some confidence. So the seasonal pattern in the economy and markets seems to repeat year after year after year too. And it's almost a sentimental seasonality where we start off, oh crap, this year isn't going the way we want. Summertime, it doesn't get any better because we're going to give it a chance. And then as Stanley Fischer said in 2014, we have to, by September, we're apologizing for missing all of our forecasts and we have to do something about it. So there's a very seasonal optimism in, okay, this year was scratch that, it didn't work, but there's always next year. And we get to September, the Fed does something, the ECB does something, the Bank of Japan does something that just harkens back to our deep fundamental human nature and calendars. And we think this might be the year, only to be disappointed again next year.
Poetry is the distillation of understanding, emotion, down to as few words as possible, as opposed to a novel, which you can prattle on and on and on. So what you just said can be distilled into a single sentence. And I'm going to read a sentence such as that, but I want the audience again to play the game of guessing which of the following sentences and sequences is poetry by the bard of the bond markets and which one is Robert Louis Stevenson. So here we go. Can you guess which one is which? Hope springs eternal, and for our cases, that's not in spring. Now here's another option. In the other gardens and all up the vale, from the autumn bonfires, see the smoke trail. Pleasant summer over and all the summer flowers, the red fire blazes, the gray smoke towers. Sing a song of seasons, something bright in all, flowers in the summer, fires in the fall. Jeff, I think you should apply for it to be a poet laureate of the bond market, because this is a very good distillation, what you said here. Hope springs eternal, and for our cases, that's not in spring, it's in the autumn for the reasons that you explained.
Yeah, and it's not like it's, contrary to how it's portrayed, these are never like full-throated, happy days, optimism, throw a parade type of situation. It's really kind of, okay, this year turned out to be didn't turn out to be the way we wanted it to. So a little bit less pessimism that maybe next year goes right, but still, we've seen this movie too many times before. We know how it ends. So maybe next year could be good, but we're not really putting a whole lot of money on it. So we're not going to sell all of our bonds. We're going to hold on to a little bit of them, but we're going to hold on to a lot of them, and we might sell a little bit just to lighten up on our pessimism a bit. And that's really what this optimism and sentimentality and the seasonality seems to be. And then, post 2016, this GSIB nonsense added to it could kind of sharpen and make a more pronounced and repeatable and recognizable pattern during that fourth, not just the fourth quarter, but September, October, and November.
If anyone would be interested in literary seasonality, they can check out the Folio Society's anthologies for each of the seasons. I've got autumn here, summer, spring, and winter. They're all good. If anyone wants to learn about how this is related to the Japanese bond market, they can go to Alhambra Investments and look up August avoids zero in JGBs, which we're not going to go into detail, but just to note that we saw a bottom in Japanese government bonds on August 4th. Unbelievable. So it happened there as well. Jeff, we are now going to that section of the program where listeners offer their explanations for what's happening. Okay. And you haven't heard these before. Yeah, this is the
part I've been looking forward to, because I really want to hear what people have to say about this, because I've offered my ideas and, I think they're reasonable, but that doesn't mean I know exactly what's going on either. And I'd like to hear what other people have to say, because there's probably other factors that need to be considered as well. There's other things that can be going on.
Okay, I'm going to read two right here that fall under the category quarter-end bank activity. The first one is from @TheLastFoxStand. Does this have to do with institutions tending to pull back on their risky activities, window dressing coming into the end of Q3? Here's @HJC_Darkhorse1. If I know that you know that I know that quarterly reporting is coming up and the implications, do I move early or politely wait for you to get settled and then take my turn? The idea must ripple through the ticking clocks, upsetting the timing, might even break some springs. So quarter end bank activity.
There has to be some of that too. And as we've identified repeatedly, September is a key one. And we also add into that the federal government's calendar, which ends in September as well. So there's, I don't have any specific ideas that I can share that there's something there as well, but it is noteworthy that, September in the bank calendar, as well as the federal government's calendar, is quite a pronounced period too. So yes, there has to be something to that as well.
I'm going to show very quickly a piece of art by David Parkins, which we had him illustrate. September seasonality. Beautiful. Beautiful. I love it.
It's beautiful unless you're the guys going across the bridge. Then it looks very different.
At least there isn't someone on the other end with a scimitar like in Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom. I always think about that when I cross those kind of bridges. Agricultural seasonality. The first one. At Mr. Christoph Egen, start of fall planting season for winter crops. At _McKiskey, I know that here in the States, the farmers are starting to prepay and line up credit for next year's crop inputs, etc. At TSP Smart, money moves to safety while on vacation in the Hamptons. Stocks weak, bond bought, yields pull back. And when
they come back from vacation, it's the opposite, right? Sell in May, the stock market adage.
At Hustler Hindu, is it Santa Claus? Agricultural seasonality.
No, I love the because as we said before, there is that seasonality that goes back to the agrarian economy, the early agrarian economy, American economy. And it's not just the US too. You can see the same thing around the rest of the world. It's just that US exported a lot of what it did. And so money would flow in the opposite direction of agricultural produce, which meant that they were very, very defined seasonal choke points and low points around September and October every year, which is why, historically speaking, you see a lot of market crashes around that time because it was a choke point in the money and economic flow in the economy. So yeah, I mean, even though agriculture is anywhere near the proportion of the economy that it used to be, that it is today, that doesn't mean that there are sectors built upon agriculture that do exhibit these flows. And again, as I said before, Santa Claus, yes, Christmas is a definitely not just for retailers, but also finance and money. Money flows. There's much more money flowing around the economy late in the year than in the beginning of the year through the commercial channels because of the Christmas shopping season. There is some non-economic, non-macro explanations for this seasonality. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to why would bond yields rise and people get more optimistic.
Here are a couple ideas we haven't discussed at all, and they both come from at flashy _boy _mall, and they have to do with China. Well, I would think it has to do with the upcoming Chinese Golden Week holiday. The PBOC is gathering liquidity to hold them over that specific holiday. Things always get interesting from a liquidity aspect around these Chinese holidays. Also, keep an eye on the USD HKD cross. Here's part 2. Also, China has been selling metals from their reserves over the last couple of months. As a longtime student of Jeff, this kind of screams liquidity problem to me. China.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that was brought up too, because yes, as we said, 2018, the landmine, one of the biggest markers for that for me was the Chinese coming out of their national holiday Golden Week and saying, we think things are bad here. Yeah, there's absolutely, you have to factor that there's a tremendous amount of Chinese dollar influence in this seasonality too. As I would also point out, the beginning of every year, simply because that's when the communists like to do their planning. They do their planning during the fourth quarter, and then they unleash their plan, and it usually has a January effect as well. And if you're a bank operating in the global Eurodollar system, you have to be aware of the Chinese January bank effect, whatever that might be. It might be more liquidity, it might be less liquidity, it might be more stealth interventions, it might be less. And so during the fourth quarter, you're thinking ahead, what are the Chinese going to do? And maybe sometimes that's for some reason I can't explain or nobody else can explain, it tends to be Treasury negative. Who knows? But there's absolutely, China is involved in this too, especially with their Golden Week holiday so pronounced during that period of the calendar.
The last category is Treasury Bills, Notes, and Bonds. 2 very quick comments and then a little bit of a longer one. Again, at flashy_boy_mall, 4-week Treasury Bill anomalies, the key. Next one, at Bobby_Brown. T-bill yields start falling precisely from August 18th, 2021. Now, that was all on Twitter, but YouTube also exists, and you can add lots of comments in the comments section, which is where we go to next. Super F11. As credit gets tighter, foreseeing the September quarter end, UST bonds and notes tend to get sold by borrowers in August in order to make up for reduced credit availability. As this credit tightness tends to linger until the December quarter end, yields continue to remain elevated until January of the following year, when credit conditions once again seem to relax somewhat, allowing US Treasury, UST bond yields to drop again. Ideas? What do you think about those, Jeff?
I think there's a lot of good stuff here, and I'm like I said, I'm glad I solicited the opinion, because I think you have to take into account all of those, the T-bills especially. I mean, something we talk about all the time. And it's, and again, there is no one explanation for what's going on here. And it can't be one explanation, because the Treasury market and the global economy, which all of these things are linked together, so unbelievably complex. It's almost certainly a combination, probably, of a lot of these different things, not just the sentimentality that I described, and probably a little bit less of the GSIB surcharge nonsense. I mean, that might have some effect, but there is an underlying fractal type behavior where we see this time and again, especially over the last 5 years, where the bond market gets a little more optimism in the autumn. And it's not really exactly clear why that is, except that it doesn't seem to relate to whatever the Fed is doing or whatever the economy is doing, which kind of sounds counterintuitive. And it's certainly what that means in our current circumstances, as we're seeing this optimism creep back into the bond market in 2021, it doesn't seem like we can say this is a taper tantrum, because so far it's no different than last year's August and September, or the year before that, or the year before that, or the year before that. So it doesn't seem like maybe I didn't get caught with my pants down after all, and this is just normal autumn type behavior. And if that's the case, then what are we really saying here? We're saying we're looking ahead to next year in a very different fashion than Jay Powell is.
If you had a shadow money dashboard, a credit and collateral dial measurement system, what would some of the switches be on this dashboard? What would some of the dials represent? In part 3 of this episode, we're going to name a few of these measurements that everyone that's watching right now can go and check and see which way they're going to get a sense of what's happening in the shadows of the monetary system.